Chapter 1. Constance groaned as she heard the pounding on her door. She must have missed the rooster's crow again. She hated mornings with a passion, but her mother insisted she be up as soon at dawn so she could have breakfast and do her chores. The door opened. Constance Jane Dailey. You've overslept again. Why are you so lazy? Constance didn't argue with her mother because she knew it would be futile. She did tell herself she wasn't lazy though. Sleeping later than most didn't make you lazy. No, it was sitting around doing nothing that made you lazy. And Constance was always doing something to contribute. She just wished her day could start a little later. She didn't see the crime. I'm getting up, Constance said, swinging her feet to the floor. I'll be out in a minute. She thought for the millionth time that she needed to marry, but she needed to marry a man who thought days should begin later than sunup. Not that she'd ever met that sort of man or even believed he existed. Her mother shut the door, and Constance yawned. She put on her everyday dress and headed outside to the outhouse. When she was back inside, she sat down to breakfast. Her two younger siblings were already there, most of their meal gone. This looks delicious. Thanks, Ma. How late were you up last night? Her pa asked, frowning at her. I went for a walk late. Probably shortly after midnight. He shook his head. Why would you stay up so late, knowing you were needed up at dawn to help around the farm? Constance looked down at her food, shrugging. I just feel like I'm on a time clock different than everyone else's. You all look so happy in the mornings, and I want to throw rotten eggs at anyone who speaks to me. Late at night is glorious. The world feels so pure, as if there are no people around to mess it up. You know? Her ma took her spot at the table. You need coffee. I don't like coffee, Constance told her mother for the millionth time. I do as much work as everyone else. I just start a little later and work a little harder. Not under my roof you don't. Pa glared at her. Yes, sir, Constance replied, knowing full well they'd be having the same conversation again. Soon. She wished there was someone who understood her need to stay up late and sleep later in the day. As soon as breakfast was over and Johnny and Mary were off to school, Ma handed Constance a basket and a list. Walk into town, buy everything on the list, and check at the post office for our mail. Constance nodded. Yes, Ma. She really did like shopping days because she could wander along the road, thinking about things as she moved. She loved walks in the same way she loved staying up all night. The walk that morning was heavenly. It was spring, and the flowers were blooming all around her. Summer was coming, and though Constance didn't hate winter the way some did, she was happy it was spring. It meant the whole world was renewed and there would be baby animals. Once she reached town, she went straight to the general store, getting everything on her ma's list. Ma was always very meticulous as she explained exactly what she wanted on her lists. It amused Constance to find the things her mother wanted. After putting the supplies on her father's account, she walked to the post office. A woman she had heard many things about stood in line ahead of her. Are you still sending mail-order brides out west? Constance asked without forethought. She hadn't planned to ask, but now that she had, she realized it may be her way out. She could go west, marry a stranger, and perhaps she could even find one who didn't mind sleeping late. The woman, Elizabeth Tandy, nodded. I am. Are you looking for a husband? Not hard enough, according to my mother. Constance grinned. Any chance there's a man who works at night and wouldn't mind if his wife slept until 8? Elizabeth smiled. I just got a letter from a man yesterday who drives a freight wagon in his local area. He's in South Dakota, and he works odd hours. He said he needed a wife who didn't feel the need to adhere to a rigid schedule. That would be me. Tell him that's me, would you? You should tell him yourself. Do you have time to stop by on your way home? Elizabeth asked. Constance shook her head. No, my mother thinks all work for the day should be completed by noon. Can I come by after lunch? Of course. Any time you can find to come by within the next few days would be great. Thank you so much. Elizabeth took her turn receiving mail, and then Constance was requesting her family's. Anything for Dailey? She asked. The postmistress handed Constance 2 letters. Thank you. Constance hurried home, practically running, so she could finish her chores on time. On her mother's time, of course, and then she could visit Elizabeth that afternoon. She'd need to sweep, dust, and help with the noon meal if her mother asked. Other than that, she was finished with her chores for the day. She put the supplies onto the work table, and her mother looked through them quickly. You got everything just right. Constance smiled. With the way her mother's lists were, it was impossible to get the wrong thing. Constance quickly did her chores and had them finished well before her mother asked for help with the meal. It was only Constance, Ma, and Pa who ate the noon meal together during the week. Johnny and Mary would stay at school and eat the lunches they'd taken. As soon as the meal was over, Constance sprang to her feet to wash the dishes, before her mother even had a chance to ask. When they were wiped and put away, Constance removed her apron. Is it all right if I visit a friend this afternoon? Constance hated feeling as if she had to ask. She was 19 years old. Most of her friends were already married. Yes, that's fine. Constance kissed her mother's cheek before turning to run off. Thanks, Ma, she called over her shoulder. As she hurried, she thought about actually stepping inside the house where Elizabeth lived with her husband. Her home was huge, one of the largest in town, and it was fancy. She was excited to see inside it, but she was even more excited at the idea of marrying a man who didn't like rigid schedules. Oh, she couldn't wait. Once she got to Rock Creek Road, she knocked loudly. She was invited to be there, and she was proud of that fact. The door was opened by the man she recognized as Elizabeth's husband. I have an appointment with Mrs. Tandy, she said. Yes, of course. He led her through the house to a room where Elizabeth sat at a desk. You have a visitor. Elizabeth looked up and nodded, smiling at her husband. Thank you. I'll check on the children. Take your time. Mr. Tandy shut the door as he left the room. Let me find the letter I told you about. You can read it and respond if you are interested in marrying the man. Constance took the letter offered to her. It seems odd to just read a letter to decide if a man is right for me. I'm sure it does. Elizabeth smiled. But I do this all the time, and I've never sent a woman who was unhappy with her marriage. Unfolding the letter, Constance started to read. Dear Matchmaker, I am a 30-year-old man who lives just outside Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I drive freight for a living, and I tend to be gone most evenings. I would like a bride who would not be bothered by the hours I keep, and who would be flexible enough to not adhere to a rigid schedule. If you could find a woman like that for me, I would be the happiest man alive. I make a good living for myself, and I'm ready to start a family. Please find someone who has these traits. Looks don't matter to me, but I would be especially happy if she had long brown hair. I'm enclosing money for your fee and a train ticket into Sioux Falls. Thank you for your assistance. Leonard Berry. Constance read through the letter again. He's perfect. I'll take him. She even had long brown hair like he'd requested. They were a match made in heaven. She hoped. Elizabeth laughed. I'll send him a telegram with the day and time of your arrival. When do you want to leave? Constance pursed her lips, thinking about how hard it would be to tell her family what she'd decided to do. Monday, she said. That would give her 5 days to explain and pack all her belongings. All right. I'll see about getting your ticket and let Mr. Berry know when you'll arrive. Elizabeth grinned. I'm glad you decided to go to him. I think you both need a match who can live alternate hours. Alternate hours. I like that. Constance got to her feet. I'll go home and explain now. That's going to be the hard part. It always is, Elizabeth said with a smile. Many of my siblings have gone to be brides, or grooms. It'll work out. I promise. On her way home, Constance went over and over in her mind what she should say to her mother. She knew Ma would be disappointed in her decision. She could just feel it in her bones. Hopefully, through her disappointment, her mother would understand why she needed to do this. She wouldn't dare mention the alternate hours thing, though. Her mother would never be able to understand why Constance wasn't fond of mornings. When Constance walked onto the farm a short while later, her mother was hanging clothes. It was a task they usually did together, so Constance joined her to help. I didn't know you were planning to do wash this afternoon. I wasn't. Farmer's Almanac says rain tomorrow, so your pa asked me to do it a day early. Constance looked off into the distance. It didn't look like rain was coming, and the Farmer's Almanac was wrong as often as it was right. I see, Constance said, though she didn't. The way her parents did things confused her at times. I went to see Elizabeth Tandy today. Ma nodded. Isn't she the one who sends women out west to marry strangers? She is. And I've agreed to be one of those women. Ma stopped what she was doing, one hand raised in the air, a clothespin clutched in that hand. What made you decide to do that? Constance shrugged. I don't exactly have any suitors right now, and I thought it was time I married and raised a family. You're a pretty girl. We could find you someone. No need. I'm going to South Dakota. Doesn't that sound exciting? Ma shrugged. I guess when you're young and longing for adventure, any place can seem exciting. When do you leave? Surprised at how well her mother was taking the news, Constance said, Monday. You never have been one to let moss grow, have you? Ma sighed. Let me tell your father. He'll take it better from me. So, you don't have a problem with me doing this? Ma shook her head. No, I don't. I think it's time you chose your own path in life. Constance dropped the dress she was holding into the laundry basket between them and threw her arms around her mother. Thank you, Ma. Ma patted her awkwardly. Just be happy, Constance. I will do my best. As soon as laundry was finished, she and Ma went through her clothes. I do wish you'd given us an extra week to make you a dress to be married in. I think with that sewing machine of yours, we could have it done before Monday with no problem. Mary can do the cooking for a few days. Ma looked at her for a moment before nodding. She really can. We've taught her well. That means another trip into town for you in the morning. You'll need to buy some fabric, and we'll make that dress. It won't be easy, but I don't need easy. Constance smiled. I don't either. And just like that, her mother was helping her get ready for a marriage that would take her far away. They continued to go through her clothes, putting stuff in piles. We should have done this a long time ago, Constance said. I think these 2 dresses would fit Mary. Soon all her clothes were sorted by those she should take, those she should pass on to her sister, and those that should be discarded for rags. After supper, Constance went for a walk, looking at the stars. It was her favorite thing to do at night, but this time she had an ulterior motive. It would give her parents time to talk so her father could learn of the wedding in the best way possible. Mary joined Constance, something she did on rare occasions. Thank you for the dresses, she said. I've been wondering how much longer the ones I have would fit over my bosoms. Constance smiled. I'm happy to give them to you. Ma and I are making me a new dress this weekend, so you'll have to take care of cooking. Mary shrugged. It's good practice for me. At least that's what Ma would say. You're a good cook. You just have to remember that and not second-guess yourself. That's much harder in practice, Mary said, sighing. I always think I've messed something up, and I try to fix it, and I ruin it by trying to fix it. It's silly of me, but I do it every time. This time, you shouldn't, Constance said. What's going on, Connie? Mary asked. What are Ma and Pa whispering about? I've decided to go west as a mail-order bride. You're marrying a stranger? Mary sounded shocked. I am. I have no marriage prospects here. It's time I married and started a family of my own. This just feels right. Ma is telling Pa for me. I can't decide if that's crazy or exciting. Constance laughed. I think it's a little of both. Mary nodded. Perhaps. We're going to miss having you here. But I'm a little excited I can move into a larger bedroom. She stopped walking. You don't think Ma will let Johnny have it, do you? No, I think you'll get it if you want it. You'll be the eldest at home. I guess that means I'll also have more chores. Probably. Then I'll miss you and be glad you're gone all at once. That seems fair to me. Chapter 2. Leonard paced back and forth in front of the train depot, waiting for his bride. He knew so little about her, but the matchmaker had assured him she was the woman he needed. Finally, the train pulled into the station. It was on time, but he'd been 15 minutes early, so it felt like it was late. As he watched, people exited the train. Sioux Falls was just a whistle stop for the trains, so only a few people got off. An older couple who was obviously together. A woman with 3 small children. And a woman on her own. He prayed the woman coming for him was on her own and wasn't the one with 3 children. While he loved children, he wanted to have his own. The woman with children walked to a man who embraced her, and he breathed a sigh of relief, walking to the woman who was traveling alone. Are you Constance? She nodded. And you must be Leonard. Yes. I was hoping that was you. I'm happy to not be standing at this station for hours waiting for a stranger. She grinned at him. Now what? The pastor is at the church waiting for us. All right. We're going to the church then. She smoothed her dress, wishing she had time to bathe, but she understood why she didn't. And we must be quick. I need to be at work in 2 hours, and that means getting married and getting you home first. All right. Shouldn't be too terribly hard to get what we need to do done. What hours do you work? I work from 4 to midnight. He eyed her as if he was worried she wouldn't like him working those hours. Sounds perfect. I'll have supper waiting for you at home when you arrive, but only if there's food in the house. I can't magic something up with no skills. He laughed. There's food. I had my friend's wife come over and make a list of everything a wife would need, and then I bought it all. Well, I'll have to thank her when I meet her then. Do you have a trunk? He asked, looking around. Yes, it's there, she said, pointing to a small black trunk. I'll get that on the wagon, and we'll head to the church. I'm ready to be married. She nodded. As am I. It's been a long journey, and I'm ready to get on with our new life together. She realized she wasn't wearing the new dress she'd planned to wear for the wedding, but that was fine as long as Ma never found out. She'd wear it for her first Sunday in her new church. Once they were on the road, it only took a couple of minutes to get to the church. He helped her down and took her hand, pulling her toward the church. Pastor Abrams is the one doing the ceremony. He said he'd have 2 witnesses there for us. Inside the church, she felt at peace. It was a small church, but that didn't matter to her one whit. She'd be married, and that's what really mattered. Pastor Abrams called out to him. Leonard, you found your bride. Leonard grinned. I did. She got off the train just like she was supposed to, so we're getting married. That'll be nice, the pastor said. The ceremony was over quickly, and when Leonard was told to kiss his bride, he held nothing back, grabbing Constance by the waist and pulling her to him. He kissed her for all he was worth, and Constance was a bit startled by it all. "Sorry to run out so fast," Leonard said, "but I need to get her home before I head to work." He shook the pastor's hand, and Constance was sure she saw a coin pass from one hand to the other. It pleased her to know her new husband was thoughtful. Pastor Abrams smiled. "Have a good night at work. Welcome to our community, Constance." With that, they left the church and he helped her into the wagon. "I want to have a few minutes to show you around the house before I have to leave," he explained. "Oh, that would be nice. I live here in town, which is nice for shopping and worship," he said. "The house isn't grand by any means, but it's comfortable. It has 3 bedrooms, and there's even a water closet. I think you'll be comfortable there." "It sounds lovely. We didn't have a water closet back east. The winters are harsh here, so I put one in. I hate going outside in the middle of the night and freezing my bottom off." Constance nodded, grinning. "I hated that back home. So, tell me about yourself and why you chose to answer the letter." "My reason seems mostly shallow, but I hope you'll listen. I was born into a family of morning people. They're all up before the rooster crows, and I was never like that. I like to walk at midnight and live the same pace as everyone else, and I get the same amount of sleep, but I'm in bed much later." She sighed. "My mother told me I was lazy a lot." "It's not lazy." He shook his head. "I like that you are a night owl like me. I drive for the freight company because I love to be awake at night. Most nights I'll be home by about midnight. Is that too late for you?" "Not at all. I could easily stay up until 3 in the morning, but then I need to sleep until 11. "Sounds good to me. We'll get along great in that regard." He pulled up in front of a small house and helped her down. "This is my place. You're welcome to make any decor changes you'd like. I think it's decorated the way I do everything in life, haphazardly." She grinned. "I'm sure there will be things I want to change to my taste. It'll all work out in the end." He took her trunk and led her toward the house, opening the door wide to allow her to enter first. He paid a lady to come in and clean for him, so Constance wouldn't be disgusted by the state of things. She stopped in the entryway of the house, seeing the kitchen straight ahead and the parlor to her left. Unsure of which way to go, Constance stood in the middle of the room, feeling like she was invading Leonard's privacy. Leonard set the trunk down and put a hand on her shoulder. "This is your home now. Go where you want." Constance chose to go into the kitchen first. There were cabinets everywhere, which thrilled her. She could keep the kitchen clean with so much space to store food and dishes. "Is there a cellar for food as well?" she asked. He nodded. "I have potatoes, carrots, and all the food my mother canned for me down there. She's certain I'll starve to death if she doesn't provide me with food from her garden." He shook his head. "Sounds like she loves you. You can't complain about that." "Is she nearby?" "Yes, I grew up on a farm outside town. My parents both still live there. I look forward to meeting them." Truthfully, she was nervous about it, but that was normal as far as she was concerned. "They attend the church we were married in, so you'll meet them on Sunday." He walked through the kitchen into the bedroom. "This is the room we'll share. There are 2 other bedrooms upstairs that you can explore later. I just want you to see the basics before I head out to work for the night." She frowned. "I won't have time to make a real meal before you go." "That's all right. My friend's wife brought over a big pot of chicken and dumplings for us to warm and eat today. You don't have to start cooking until tomorrow if that's your preference. You must be tired after a week on the train." She smiled. "We'll see how that works out. I'll try to cook if I can force myself to do it." he chuckled. "But if you could heat up the chicken and dumplings, I'd be happy to." She went to his icebox, saying a silent prayer of thanks that he had the modern appliance, and pulled out the soup he'd mentioned. Starting the stove, she put the pot in the middle of the stove where it would get the most heat. She'd have to constantly stir it, but at least it would heat up quickly. While it warmed, she investigated the bedroom she'd share with Leonard, noting that he'd placed her trunk at the foot of the bed. It seemed odd to think she'd be sharing a bed with a stranger, but with Leonard, it didn't feel unnatural. She set the table in between stirring the food, and when it was ready, she served up 2 big bowls of the chicken dish. "I hope you're hungry." He nodded. "Starving. I usually eat a little earlier in the day. I take a meal to work with me, and then I eat when I get home. I hope that won't be too strange for you." She shook her head. "I'm nothing if not flexible." After a short prayer of thanks, they dug into the meal, and Constance was pleased to realize her chicken and dumplings were much better than she was eating. These weren't bad, but she really preferred her own. It was good to realize that. After the meal, he gave her a quick peck on the cheek and disappeared out the door. She did the dishes and unpacked her things, looking in the icebox for something she could serve for supper. She felt as if she was auditioning for the part of wife, and she wanted to start off on the right foot, not serving something some other woman had made. There was a chicken in the icebox, and she pulled it out, planning to make fried chicken with mashed potatoes and a cream gravy to go with it. Surely, he would be happy with her serving something so delicious. She glanced at the clock, seeing that it was only 4 in the afternoon, and she didn't have to have supper ready until midnight. So, she put the chicken back into the icebox and looked around for some cleaning that needed to be done, but everything was spotless. Why did the man need a wife if not to clean for him? She had no idea, but she'd look around and find something to do. After a short while of exploring the house, she yawned and realized the perfect answer was for her to take a nap so she could stay awake until midnight. There was no way to sleep late on a train, so she had been up early every day since leaving Beckham. She took a nice long nap, and then settled herself at the table with paper, pen, and ink to write a letter home and let everyone know she'd arrived safely. Her letter to her mother was short and sweet, explaining she'd arrived safely and was now married and settling into her new house. Then she wrote a second letter to Elizabeth Tandy, telling her the same thing. She was thankful that Elizabeth had sent her to South Dakota. It seemed like it would be a pleasant place for her to live. She still had a few hours before Leonard was to arrive home, so she went from room to room, thinking about the changes she wanted to make. She wanted red and white gingham curtains and a matching tablecloth for the kitchen. Hopefully Leonard wouldn't mind if she bought the supplies the following day. She would make herself crazy without work to do. She made a list of the things that needed to be refreshed, and then she went into the kitchen to cook supper. It would be ready early, but that couldn't be a bad thing. There was no bread anywhere, so she mixed up a batch and set it out to rise before she mixed the breading for the chicken. She peeled a small mound of potatoes to eat with the chicken, and once they were on to boil, she punched down the bread. 30 minutes before she expected Leonard, she put the bread in the oven and fried the chicken. It was her first meal to cook as a married woman, and she wanted it to be just perfect. She even had most of the dishes from the meal done when Leonard walked in the door, tired from his hard day at work. She fixed their plates while he washed his hands, and they sat together to eat. "I hope you like fried chicken." "Of course, I do," he said. "And this smells delicious." They held hands during their prayer, and then they both dug into the food she'd prepared. "I think there should be enough for your meal at work tomorrow," she said softly. "I'm just thrilled you made fresh bread. I buy bread from the bakery, but it's just not the same as smelling it as you walk into your house." She smiled, nodding. "I agree. I love baked goods, so I hope you don't mind eating them a lot. You will not hear me complain." He finished off his mashed potatoes and reached for more. "This gravy is wonderful." It's what my mother always made with fried chicken, so she taught me to do the same. Leonard smiled. I'll have to thank her when we meet. She'd be pleased. Oh, I wrote a couple of letters and need to post them tomorrow. Easy enough. I'll take you to the mercantile, and you can mail them from there. I'd like that, she said. Could I also get a bit of fabric while we're out? Do you need a new dress? He asked. She shook her head. No, but I would like curtains for the kitchen and parlor, and a tablecloth and some pillows. Just things to make the house my own. He grinned. I had a feeling you'd enjoy changing things. Constance shrugged. Everything is beautiful the way it is, but it just doesn't feel homey. Oh, I agree. My mother offered to sew for me, but I wanted that to be left up to my wife whenever I married. You asked why I agreed to be a mail-order bride. Why did you send for one? She asked. Because I have a hard time meeting women with the strange hours I keep. The only women in church are already married, and it just felt like the smart way to go about things. I see. Well, whatever reason, I'm glad I was the one who ended up with your letter. I think we're going to be very happy together. I sure hope so. He pushed away from the table. I'll be in the parlor when you're finished with the dishes. Constance watched him go with a smile. She was glad he wasn't meddling with her work. Chapter 3. As Constance finished the dishes, she couldn't help but wonder if Leonard was going to expect her to consummate the marriage that night. She wasn't certain she was ready, and hopefully he wasn't ready either. Wouldn't it be better if they got to know one another and learned all they could before they married? When she joined him in the parlor, she planned to bring up the idea of waiting with him, but she found him all sprawled out, reading from the Bible, and he looked very sweet that way. She was pleased to find herself married to a Christian man. Dishes are finished, she said, taking the seat beside him on the sofa. Do you usually stay up for a while, or do you go to bed after you've eaten? I'm usually up for another hour or two. Does that bother you? She laughed softly. I was hoping you'd say that. I do enjoy being up at night. I love to walk and look at the stars. He smiled. Let's go. Really? You wouldn't mind? Not at all. Did you live in the city back east or in the country? He asked. Country. My father was a farmer just outside of Beckham, Massachusetts, which is where the matchmaker you wrote your letter to lives. I see. And did you enjoy being a farmer's daughter? He asked. All except for the early mornings, she said with a grin. The earliest morning we'll have is for church on Sundays, and the service is at 11, so we won't really have to be up before 10. That sounds like it won't be a problem, she said, pulling on her coat and hat. It was spring, but it was still cold in the middle of the night. Leonard pulled on a coat as well, and they left the house, walking down a quiet street, hand in hand. I really love Sioux Falls, he said. It's a bustling town since the railroad came, but it's still small enough to feel like home. That's really nice. Beckham was the same. Big enough to have what we needed, but small enough that we could be happy there. I didn't know everyone, but I didn't have to. I knew the people who mattered to me. He nodded emphatically. That's how it is for me here. I do hope you're going to love Sioux Falls as much as I do. I'm sure I will. It's nice to know my mother isn't going to tell me what to do and when to wake up. She'd be angry every time I slept through the roosters crowing, so most days. She grinned at him. I really feel like I thrive at night. I always have as well. My pa thought I was the laziest human alive because I slept until it was time for breakfast. He thought I should be up seeing to the livestock before the sun was up. It sounds like we need each other, if only to be around people who are on the same schedule we are. She smiled. Just promise me our children won't be forced to adhere to our schedule, and they'll be allowed to love mornings if they choose to. Oh, absolutely. I don't mind being awake when others are asleep. The world is too precious to only see when it's crowded. I hope my child will understand that, but if he or she loves mornings, I won't say a word. How many children do you want? Constance asked. I don't know, 4 or 5? You? Sounds good to me. There were 3 in my family. I have 6 brothers and a sister. I'm the youngest. I'm the oldest, she said with a smile. Did you like being the youngest? I probably would have enjoyed it more if my brothers hadn't constantly teased me, but it's okay. They're all farmers now, and I'm doing something I love. Leonard turned onto another street to loop back around to their house. You don't think they love farming? She asked. I honestly have no idea. They always seemed like the type to do whatever was expected of them. They were expected to be up early, so they were. They were expected to farm like Pa, so they did. He shrugged. I didn't do anything expected of me, I'm afraid. I will just be careful to have no expectations. Well, other than not drinking or cheating? How about I just promise not to break the 10 commandments, and we'll all be content? That works for me. Staring straight ahead, she asked the question on her mind. Do you expect to consummate the marriage tonight? No, I really don't. I figured we'd take our time getting to know one another before we jump into that. How much time are you thinking? She asked. I have no idea. Maybe tomorrow, but maybe not for a month or 2. We'll see how it goes. All right. Constance would have preferred a date to mark on her calendar, so she knew what was expected, but that was all right. At least he was being kind about waiting. Supper was wonderful tonight. You must have experience cooking. From the time I was 12, my mother expected me to make supper for the family twice per week. She'd been teaching me up until that point, but that's when she declared I was old enough to plan, shop for, and make a meal. I've always enjoyed cooking. Good. I really enjoy eating. She laughed. I will probably bake a cake tomorrow. Is there anything in particular you'd like me to make for our midnight meal? Oh, how she loved knowing midnight would be part of her day. I'm awfully partial to roast. Then I'll see to that. I didn't notice one in your icebox, but if there's a butcher nearby, I'd be happy to buy one for us. There is. I'll give you a quick walking tour tomorrow so you can learn where everything is. We live in a good spot because it's easy to walk to church, the mercantile, and the butcher shop. You won't need to wait on me to drive you places. I can hitch up horses and drive, she said softly. I've been doing it my entire life. I think it's great you know how, but hopefully you won't need to. He turned to walk up to their house. I'm glad you're here, Constance. I'm really happy to be here. He gave her time to get ready for bed, and she put on her nightgown and climbed between the sheets. She was tired, but it was a good tired. When Leonard joined her, he sat down on the edge of the bed and removed his clothes before sliding into bed. He obviously didn't wear a nightshirt as her pa always had. Reaching out to her, he pulled her close, kissing her forehead gently. Sleep, and we'll have another busy day tomorrow, he told her. Constance snuggled close to her new husband. She'd never slept with another person, so it was strange, but she had a feeling she would like sleeping with him. There was just something about the man that made her feel safe and at home. Who would have thought moving across the country to marry a stranger could possibly be the right thing to do? But for her it had been. She only hoped he felt the same way about her. Asterisk. When Constance woke in the morning, it was to find Leonard had all the covers on the other side of the bed, while she lay shivering. Shaking her head, she got dressed and went into the kitchen to fix breakfast. It was past 11, which was the latest she'd ever been allowed to sleep. Even when she'd been ill, her mother had thought she should be up before 9. It felt good to sleep as late as she had. She made a quick breakfast, realizing she would probably be making 4 meals per day. That was all right though. As long as they were small meals, it should all be fine. She'd just taken the bacon up from the skillet when Leonard came out of the bedroom. "Did you put all the covers on me when you got up?" he asked, looking confused. "No, I spent the night shivering while you stole the covers." "You'd think you'd have better manners than that," she joked. "I'll try to leave you some tonight." He dropped a kiss to her nose. "What are you making?" "Bacon, eggs, and toast." "I hope that's all right." "Sure. I like my eggs scrambled." "Then I'll make them all that way." She cracked 6 eggs into the skillet and added a dash of milk, immediately mixing them so they would be the desired consistency. "Are you still taking me for a tour this morning?" "I'd love to," he told her. It was exciting for him to finally have her there. They would be able to explore together, and he could already see she loved the idea. After breakfast, he took her first to the mercantile, where she mailed the letter and chose the fabric she wanted for the kitchen and parlor. She'd have to redo the bedroom eventually, but as she'd be asleep in there more than she'd be awake, the other rooms took precedence in her mind. He purchased the fabric, letting the merchant know that she could always charge to his account, and the two of them left for the butcher's shop. Constance chose a large piece of meat, knowing she'd make some for supper, and she could make a stew out of it the following night. She was well versed in using every last bit of meat. "Do you hunt?" she asked Leonard as they were leaving the butcher. She could make meat last longer if he brought her fresh meat that way. He shook his head. "I never really enjoyed hunting as a boy, so I stopped as soon as I moved out of my father's house. My brothers will sometimes share the meat they kill with me, so I have a steady supply of meat, even without the butcher shop." "Oh, good. I want to stretch every penny as far as I can." He chuckled. "I'd like that a lot, but don't go overboard. I make a good wage, and I don't need you to hurt yourself trying to save money." "I'll do my best," she said with a smile. "Today I'll be occupied with sewing all day." "I'm excited, though sewing dresses is not something I'm fond of. I prefer to do the easy sewing projects, like curtains and pillows." "Well, I won't show you my mending basket for a few days then." "You have a mending basket?" she asked, surprised. "Yes. My ma usually takes it home once a month or so, but she'll expect you to do it now." "That won't bother me a bit. I'll enjoy working on your mending." "How do you know that if you don't like sewing?" Leonard asked. Constance shrugged. "Because I know I like you, and I want to do things for you. Beyond cooking, which I already enjoy." "I hope you're right. It would be nice." He carried her shopping basket home, and she put the meat into the icebox so she could cook it when it was time. "Let's sit together for a while, before I have to leave." She nodded. "All right." He pulled her toward the parlor, and she was happy to sit beside him on the sofa. "Did you want to talk about something?" "No, I just thought I'd enjoy kissing you a bit before I have to leave for work." "I'd like that," she said, surprising herself. She had never really been kissed before Leonard, and she was truly astonished at how much she enjoyed kissing him. He lowered his head, capturing her lips with his, a hand going to the nape of her neck to cradle the back of her head. Deepening the kiss, he used his tongue to touch hers, once again startling Constance. "I don't know if touching tongues is allowed." He chuckled. "We're married. Everything is allowed now." Moving closer to him, she said, "Okay, do it again then." They sat there together for a long while, kissing and getting to know one another's bodies. When his hand cupped her breast through her dress, she gasped in surprise. "Is that all right?" "You're certain?" He nodded emphatically. "I'm positive. God made women beautiful so men could enjoy them, after they're married, of course." "Oh, of course." She looked at him. "Does that mean I can touch your chest? Is that allowed?" He smiled. Do you want to touch me there? I want to touch you everywhere, she said. I have a feeling we're not going to wait terribly long to go to bed together, he told her. We slept together last night. I mean before we consummate the marriage, and I think you knew exactly what I meant, didn't you? She laughed, nodding. I wouldn't object if you wanted to consummate. He took a deep breath. Tonight then. We'll skip the walk and exercise a different way. Leaning toward him, she kissed him once more. I need to fix your meal before you leave for work. Do you want the chicken and dumplings again, or the fried chicken? She'd already made up his lunch pail with bacon sandwiches from their breakfast that morning. Fried chicken, he told her. And I hope there are mashed potatoes and gravy left. There's enough of everything. I'll need to bake some more bread today, now that I have an idea of how much you'll eat. I want to keep you satisfied. He nodded. I have a feeling you will. Before leaving for work a short while later, he once again kissed her passionately. I'm going to think about you all day. I hope so. I like when you think about me, she said, watching as he walked away until he was out of sight. Then she did the dishes and thought about the idea of consummating their marriage. As a farm girl, she knew the mechanics of the marriage act, but the cows had never seemed pleased when they were mounted by the bulls. Hopefully it wouldn't be as bad as it was for cows. Her married friends had told her it was wonderful though, and she was going to cling to that thought all day. It couldn't be all bad if her friends said they enjoyed it, could it? It didn't make sense to wonder and fret about it, she finally decided. She'd find out for herself in a few short hours, and then she would know for certain. As she worked on the pillows for the parlor, she thought only of Leonard. Who would have thought she could start falling in love on her first full day in South Dakota? Chapter 4. Constance had finished the curtains for the kitchen and the tablecloth by the time Leonard was home from work. And there was a pot roast ready to come out of the oven. As soon as she heard the door open, she pulled out the pot roast and added some of the liquid from it to a pot, mixing in the water and flour she'd already mixed together. It took less than 5 minutes to get supper on the table. Leonard nodded at the tablecloth. This is nice. And I really like the curtains. Constance carried their plates to the small table. I do too. This is just what I'd pictured when I said I wanted to do it as well. Some of my projects don't turn out exactly as I want them, but this one did. I think it looks wonderful, he told her. She set their plates on the table and then sat down with him. I'm glad you like it as much as I do. How was work tonight? It was good. Busy as always. One of my favorite things about working the shift I do is I rarely have to deal with the owners of the stores. I've heard that's an absolute nightmare. But I have a key and I just take everything inside and leave it. Much better than it could be. Where all do you go at night? She asked, fascinated by his work. I go to small cities around Sioux Falls, different ones each night. I have 4 stores on Mondays, 5 on Tuesdays, 3 on Wednesdays, that sort of thing. I see. Do you like what you do? I really do. It gives me time to think about anything I want as I'm driving. Sometimes I like to make up stories in my head as I go from store to store. It's very cathartic for me. I'd probably like that as well. That's what I do when I walk at night. I think about different things or make up stories in my head. My mother thinks it means that there's something a bit off about me, but I don't care. I love walking and thinking more than I can express. She took her first bite of pot roast, thrilled with how it came out. This is delicious, he said. Best pot roast I've ever eaten. I'm so glad you like it. My mother would never allow me to add onions to it because she doesn't care for them. I added all the onions I wanted, and I think it turned out much better. Leonard nodded emphatically. It's very good. Are there any foods you don't like that I should avoid making? He shrugged. Lutefisk, blood sausage, and porridge. He answered quickly, so she knew he really didn't like those things. I will avoid all three. Are you good with bacon and eggs most mornings? I could do pancakes or Johnny cakes or even French toast if you preferred. Just switch things around when you want to. I like eggs prepared just about any way, though scrambled are my favorite. I'm quite easy to please with food. Ma always called me her slop eater. If I wouldn't eat something, it automatically went to the pigs, but Ma would always try me first. I really am excited to meet your Ma, she said. She'll like you. She considers all her daughters-in-law daughters of her heart. She was always sad she could only have boys. Are all your brothers married? Constance asked. Leonard nodded. Yup. I'm the last. All of them have children as well. Are they much older? She asked. The next youngest is 5 years older than me. It makes sense that they're all married with children then. Yes, it makes a lot of sense. He took another bite of the roast. I want you to cook for me every day for the rest of my life. Isn't that what I agreed to yesterday afternoon? She asked with a smile. He tilted his head to one side for a moment, studying her. You're like me. You think of a day asleep to sleep. Not changing new days even when it's after midnight. That's true. How could I think any other way? She asked. All through dinner, though their conversation was lively, all she could think about was the night to come. It made sense for her to be nervous about consummating the marriage, but she wasn't sure she should be quite as nervous as she was. After supper, he went into the parlor with a newspaper, and she cleaned the dishes, taking her time so as not to hurry things along. She never should have told him she was ready. She'd just gotten carried away in the moment, loving the kisses they shared. Once she'd put the last dish away, there was no more putting off the inevitable moment, and she joined him in the parlor. Dishes are done, she announced. He set his paper down and patted the spot on the sofa beside him. Join me. She took a deep breath and did as he asked, snuggling up to his side. When he turned and kissed her right away, she did her best not to think about what was about to happen and instead lost herself in his touch. He cupped her face in his hands as his mouth explored hers. At first, she kept her hands folded in her lap, afraid to really do anything that would spur him on and make him go any faster with their consummation. After a minute or two, she put her hands on his shoulders and felt his strength through the lightweight fabric of his shirt. When she touched him, he reached to unbutton the top few buttons of his shirt. I need your touch against my bare skin. Constance didn't need to be told twice. She was aching to feel his muscles beneath her fingers. Never having seen a man shirtless in her short life, she was surprised to feel a light dusting of hair there, but she just kept stroking, determined to enjoy the moment. Leonard's fingers went to the buttons at the back of her neck, releasing each one in turn. He let his hands roam over her shoulders and bare back, though he wanted to strip her and take her there on the sofa. He knew he needed to go slowly though. He'd talked to his brother Luke about Constance coming to marry him, and his brother had given him advice on how to take things slowly to make it better for his bride. When he stopped kissing her and pulled his head up to look deeply into her eyes, they were both out of breath. He stroked one finger along the side of her cheek and down to her lips, which were red and swollen from his kisses. Touching you is better than I ever dreamed it could be. She couldn't help but smile, wondering if it was all right to admit to him that she was enjoying his touch and his kisses. Afraid it would make him think she was ready, she only smiled at him, kissing the finger that touched her lips. Leonard was sure this night would kill him, but he'd promised his brother and himself that things wouldn't go quickly. Even if he needed them to. He pushed the top of her dress from her shoulders, and then he removed his shirt. At least they could touch one another. When his hand cupped her breast through only her petticoat, she gasped in surprise. She was certain it wasn't Christian for a woman to enjoy what her husband did to her as much as she was. Is that okay? He asked. Constance nodded. It feels good. I just worry. It's not wrong, he told her. She bit her lip, not sure whether to believe him. Read the Song of Solomon while I'm working tomorrow evening. It's rarely taught in churches, because it mentions enjoying one another's bodies. If God didn't want us to enjoy what we do together, why would He make it feel so good? Deciding to believe him until she knew otherwise, she nodded, and sank in for another quick kiss. Her fingertips danced over his body, not really trying to arouse him, but learning about his body. Finally, after a long while of just letting her touch him, he got to his feet, and took her hand. That's enough parlor play. We're going to the bedroom. Being pulled along behind Leonard should have frightened Constance, but instead it made her feel powerful. This man was in a hurry to make love with her, which meant she'd done something right. It had to be a good thing that he desired her that much, didn't it? When they reached the bedroom, he was all hands, getting her out of her dress. When it fell from her breasts, she put her hands up to shield them. She'd always felt that her breasts were too small, but she could see Leonard didn't think so. Don't cover yourself, he said, his voice deeper and huskier than usual. You're perfect in every way. Constance blushed, but her hands dropped to her sides as Leonard stared at her bare body. Then he made short work of undressing himself, standing before her with nothing on. She blushed at her first sight of a naked man. She'd had no idea a man's, well, his thing would be so large. She remembered her brother as a baby, and his was always small and soft. Leonard's was anything but. He scooped her up in his arms as if she weighed nothing and dropped her on the bed, quickly following her down. His hands were everywhere, and she had no time to think anymore. It was all she could do to keep breathing. Much later, they lay together on the bed, her head resting on his shoulder. That was odd, she said. He chuckled. It felt very natural and perfect to me. I'm sorry you found it odd. She shrugged. I'm not saying it was bad, just strange. I didn't expect to feel any pleasure from you touching me, and I did. But I didn't expect it to hurt as much as it did either. I hope it doesn't hurt every time. My brother told me it's better for the woman after the first few times. I have no experience with lovemaking myself. You mean, that was your first time too? For some reason, it made Constance feel better that she'd married a man who hadn't been a philanderer. He grinned. Of course, it was. Brushing his lips across hers, he sighed. I could do that again every day of my life. She blushed. You know there are times when we won't be able to? Of course. I'll survive. I'll just want to. He reached over and turned down the lamp, and she realized she didn't know when he had lit it. Before he got home, she knew it had been off, but when they'd gone in there after their time in the parlor, it was already lit. He must have sneaked in and done it while she washed the dishes. She turned more toward him and felt closer to him than she ever had any human being in her life. Snuggling against him seemed the perfect way to sleep, and so she did. Asterisk. By Friday, Constance was ready to have her husband home for 2 whole days. Leonard had told her that he only worked 5-day weeks, and she loved that idea. Her father had often worked 7 days per week, breaking the Sabbath every single week. He'd had no choice if he'd wanted to support his family. When Leonard arrived home from work on Friday, Constance felt there was a celebration in order. She'd baked bread and a cake, and cooked a thick, hearty stew for their supper. The work week is over, she said, rushing to him and raising her lips for his kiss. Now we get 2 entire days together. He smiled. We do at that. How would you feel about going to a social and dance at the church tomorrow evening? There will be some men with instruments, and we will eat as a congregation and then dance the night away. Do you like to dance? Constance nodded. I love to dance. I went to all the dances back in Beckham. She didn't add that she was always the girl in the corner, leaning against the wall, and making sure it didn't fall down. Well then, we're going to have fun dancing tomorrow. Will your family be there? He shrugged. Sometimes my brothers bring their families, but my parents will stay at home. Could we do a picnic for lunch tomorrow? Would you mind? I'd love to. I'll hitch up the buggy, and we'll take a nice long drive. We can picnic by the river if you'd like. Constance clapped. I would adore that. She'd always been drawn to water, and her parents had taken her to the beach multiple times. Then we have our whole day planned. Sunday will just be church and a quiet day at home, if that's all right with you. Of course. I don't need to always be doing something fun. I can stay home and be happy here. A lot of times on Sunday, Ma will have the whole family over for Sunday dinner. I haven't heard if she's doing that this week, but I have a feeling she's going to insist. She'll want the entire family to meet you and get to know you. I would like that a lot. I have no friends here, so it would be nice if I could meet some of your sisters-in-law. I'd love to become friends with them. I'm thinking Ma will have us, but if not, you really are content to spend the day at home? She smiled, turning and walking toward the kitchen. Of course I am. As he ate her cooking, he watched her, thinking that God had sent him the only woman in the world who was perfect for him, and he was glad. She could cook, and she enjoyed his attentions. What more could a man ask for in a wife? What are you thinking? She asked, realizing he'd been watching her. That you're a woman who can truly make me happy. I'm so thankful I sent that letter to the matchmaker in your town. My life will never be the same. Chapter 5. Constance made them a picnic lunch as soon as she had finished the breakfast dishes the following day. There was no picnic basket, as she would have liked, so she put all their food into his lunch pail. It would work until she could talk him into buying her a picnic basket. Perhaps she could request it for Christmas. He came in from hitching the horses to the buggy as she was walking toward the door with their food. We need to be home in time for me to cook for the church supper, she told him. He nodded. We'll go now and come back when we've eaten. I want to show you the beautiful area we live in. I'd love that. After helping her into the buggy, he talked to her about the history of the Indians in the area and the early settlers of Sioux Falls. They drove along the river as he stopped to point out several things, and they had their picnic near the falls and the abandoned Queen Bee Mill. He told her the story of the mill that had cost so much to build and was only open for 2 years. We just didn't have enough power from the river or enough wheat needing to be ground, he said, shaking his head. It's still beautiful though. It is. Why, it's the tallest building I've seen. 7 stories, he said. I hear someone else is planning to make a go of it, but no one can seem to make it work. That's really sad. I hate when buildings that are that beautiful can't be used for their intended purpose. She smiled. Wouldn't it be fun to buy a building like that just to raise your family in? I'd think I was living in a castle. He frowned for a moment. Do you not find our house large enough? Constance immediately regretted her words. Oh, no. That's not what I meant at all. I'm just having a little moment of daydreaming. I think our house is wonderful. Why, I haven't even been upstairs to see the other bedrooms yet. And there's a water closet. I don't know of a woman who could find a way to complain of a house with a water closet. Are you sure? He wanted her to be happy, and if that meant working 3 jobs, then he'd do it. I'm positive. I love our home. I just always dream about what life could be. Just so you're content with your real life. So content. She covered his hand with hers. You know I'm happy here. And with you. She blushed as she said the second part, and she knew he'd understand what she meant. He leaned down and brushed his lips against hers. And I'm happy with you. Another buggy stopped and people got down, bringing a picnic with them as well. The man looked at them for a moment before raising his hand in greeting. "Ho there, Berry." Leonard raised a hand. "Fredericks." He wasn't nearly as enthusiastic with his greeting as the other man had been. "Who's the lady?" the man asked. Leonard sighed, realizing they would probably have company for the rest of their picnic. "This is my wife, Constance." "Constance, this is Freddie Fredericks and his sister, Agatha." "It's nice to meet you both," Constance said softly. Agatha skipped over and sank down on the quilt they were eating their picnic upon. "I haven't met you before." Constance smiled. "I just moved here from Massachusetts." "Oh, well, Leonard never told me he was marrying someone from back east, and I think that's rather rude, as he knew I'd set my cap for him." Agatha pouted. Constance blinked a couple of times. "Well, I had no idea. I hope we can be friends anyway." Agatha shook her head. "Probably not. Now I'll have to find another man to set my cap for. I usually just throw my bonnet at whomever I've decided I want to marry, so he'll know." Constance did her best to hide a smile. "You'll have to find another man who doesn't mind having bonnets thrown at him then." "Oh, Leonard got mad at me for it. He told me that ladies didn't throw things at men." Agatha shrugged. "At least it got his attention. I've been making cow's eyes at him for just ages, and he never seemed to notice." "Well, maybe he was busy looking somewhere else while you were making eyes at him." "Probably. We went to school together, you know. Me, and Freddie, and Leonard. Leonard was always the smartest in school, but Freddie was always the one who stood in the corner most. He held the school's record." "Right, Freddie?" Freddie nodded. "That's right. I don't think Leonard ever stood in the corner." Leonard wasn't sure how to respond to that, so he simply said, "The corner was always full." "I wasn't about to fight over the spot." His eyes met Constance's, and he could see how amused she was, so he decided to let the others stay. "Tell me some stories about your school," Constance said. "Oh, there are so many stories, I wouldn't know where to start," Freddie said. "I do," Agatha said. Leonard didn't want to be a farmer like the other boys in school, and he wasn't afraid to tell people. Once he fell asleep during class, and though the corner was full, he did have to write, "I will not sleep in class," 100 times on the blackboard during our lunch hour. Constance smiled at Leonard, imagining him sleeping in class. "I fell asleep in class once too, but my seatmate noticed, and she woke me before the teacher could." "That's good," Agatha said. "We all saw Leonard sleeping, but we just laughed, and he got caught." "Isn't that funny?" By the time they were finished eating, Constance had heard many stories of Leonard's misadventures at school. Stories she would remember so she could tell their children. As soon as they got home, Constance started chicken on to boil, and then she mixed up the dough for dumplings. Leonard had yet to try her chicken and dumplings, and she was eager for him to do so. She also thought they would be an effective way to make a first impression at the church supper. While she worked at making supper for the social, Leonard went into the parlor and fixed a small hole she'd spotted in the wall where she was certain mice would come in. As they drove with their pot and Constance in her best dress that she was supposed to be married in, she told him she'd like a cat. "We always had barn cats at home, but Ma would bring them in the house if we had a mouse problem. I'd like to get one for the house, so we don't have to worry about borrowing one. Besides, she'd always wanted a pet." He looked at her. "It's important to you?" "It is. We'll let it go in and out, so it's not stuck inside all the time, but I would love to have a kitten." "A kitten won't take care of mice. They have to be a little older." "Well, the kitten will learn." "Please, Leonard?" He couldn't say no to her, even though he believed cats belonged outside and not indoors. "I guess that would be all right. I'll ask around to see if anyone has a litter." Constance squealed. "Oh, thank you." He chuckled. "You are an easy wife to please." "I try hard." As soon as they got to the church, Leonard took the pot from her, and they walked to the church together. She smiled and waved at Pastor Abrams, whose wife was beside him. She walked to the couple, waiting for an introduction. Pastor Abrams smiled. "This is my wife, Penelope Abrams." "Penelope, this is Mrs. Berry." "I'm afraid I don't remember your first name." The pastor looked embarrassed for a moment. "I'm good with faces, but I never remember names." Constance nodded. "I have a great deal of trouble with names as well," she said. "My Christian name is Constance." "It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Abrams. I'm looking forward to church tomorrow and getting to know the ladies. We have a quilting circle every Tuesday afternoon if you'd like to join us. It starts at 2 and goes until we all have to get home to put supper on the table." "That sounds lovely." Constance smiled. "I'll be there. You don't have to bring your own quilt. We always get together to work on the same quilt, and then when that's done, someone else will bring one for us to quilt. Sometimes we even sell them to raise money for missionaries. I can't wait to go and meet everyone." "Have you quilted before?" "Oh, yes. My mother taught me when I was a girl." Mrs. Abrams smiled. "You still seem a girl to me, but I have 4 grandchildren, so I must seem ancient to you." "Not at all," Constance said. She turned when she felt a hand on her shoulder. Leonard stood over her. "Good evening, Mrs. Abrams." "Pastor." "Good to see you, Leonard," Mrs. Abrams said. "Congratulations on finding this sweet girl." Leonard smiled. "I'll always be happy I did." Pastor Abrams smiled. "You know, I always worry about weddings. You never know how a marriage will turn out. I prefer a good funeral any day." "I know who that person is." Constance laughed. "I can see why you'd say that." Leonard took Constance's arm. "I want to introduce you to 2 of my brothers and their wives." "Oh, yes, please." "It was a pleasure chatting with you, Pastor, Mrs. Abrams." Constance turned and followed Leonard to a group of people who were laughing together. She was nervous to meet his kin, but she was happy not to meet them all at once. Leonard put his arm around her shoulders. "Luke, Peter, this is my bride, Constance." "Constance, my brothers Luke and Peter." Constance smiled. "It's so nice to meet you." Both men nodded. "You as well," one of the brothers said. "Which one are you?" Constance asked. With as many brothers as he had, she wanted to be able to learn their names slowly. She really did find names difficult. "I'm Luke." "I'm the one Leonard came to for advice on marital things." One of the women snorted, and Constance was immediately drawn to her. The sound was anything but ladylike, but Constance had enough trouble being ladylike, she didn't mind it a bit. "And you are?" "Luke's wife, Caroline. And the thought he could give anyone marital advice is just a joke in my eyes." Caroline shook her head as her eyes teased her husband. "You'll pay for that, wife." Luke said. "I'm Betty," the other woman said. "I'm Peter's wife, and Peter knows better than to try to give marital advice." "Last time I tried, I slept on the floor of the barn for a week," Peter said. "Was that when you gave me advice, before I got married?" Luke asked. Peter nodded. "I will never even try that again." "I don't blame you," Leonard said, laughing with his brothers. "Where are you from?" Betty asked Constance. "I'm from Beckham, Massachusetts, a small town an hour's train ride from Boston." "Oh, Boston," Caroline said. "I've always wanted to go there. There's such rich history there." "There is," Constance agreed. "Don't you miss it?" Constance shrugged. "I haven't been gone long enough to miss it yet." Maybe when Leonard and I have our first fight it will happen. I do miss my family, though. The other women laughed, but she felt Leonard tense up beside her. Did he really think they could be married for years and never fight? Where are your children? Constance asked, changing the subject before Leonard got too upset. She wasn't sure why the subject bothered him, but it obviously did. We left them with Ma Berry, Betty said. That's what she likes all of her daughters-in-law to call her. Oh, that's nice. I'm sure she's happy to spend some time with her grandchildren. The two women exchanged a look with one another that Constance made a mental note to ask about later. Someone rang the church bell then, and they all gathered together for the pastor's prayer over their meal. It was the first prayer Constance had heard from him, and she found him a bit long-winded, but what pastor wasn't? Constance and Betty stood in line for food, while Caroline went to help serve. Constance would have happily helped, but Betty shook her head. This church does rotations. 10 women serve with each social, and this is not our time. I'm sure we'll be working next month. I see. I will happily take my turn. Looking behind her, Constance made certain the men were elsewhere. What was the look you and Caroline gave each other when I said Ma Berry must enjoy her time with the grandchildren? Betty looked around as well before answering. Ma Berry is a good woman. Really? But she's not the most nurturing woman I've ever met. She'll watch the children on rare occasions, but it can't be often, and no more than 2 families' worth of children at a time. She won't say anything when the men are around, but when it's just us ladies, she'll tell us she paid her dues, and it's our turn now. I see, Constance said, shaking her head. But she doesn't want her sons to know she feels that way? She doesn't. I've tried to talk to Peter about it, but he won't believe it, so there's no point trying. It may be different with Leonard's children, since he's her youngest, but I doubt it. Mostly, we sisters swap children. So, if someone wants to have a special day with just her husband, or just needs some time to think, one of us will watch ours and theirs. Oh, that's nice. I guess I should start watching all your children, so I can have a turn without mine. Betty laughed. That's not a bad idea. All of ours are growing up, and it will be hard for you to swap like we do. I'll have to make friends with some other newly married women, Constance said, grinning. By the time they got to the front of the line, all the chicken and dumplings were gone. I wonder what that was, Betty said, looking at the empty pot. I made chicken and dumplings, Constance said. The men seemed to have polished them off. Do the men always eat first? Yes, of course. Isn't it that way back east? Sometimes, Constance said. It did seem odd to her that every man had eaten before a single woman got a bite. It didn't matter to her much, but it was something to note. How do you feel about the strange hours Leonard works? Betty asked. I could never deal with those hours. I love them, Constance said. And it was true. She couldn't be happier.